Hi everyone, it's Cass. Welcome back to my channel, whatcassread. Today I'm going to bring you a video that's all about my favorite audiobooks. So I've been reading a lot of audiobooks lately because my work commute, I am in the car for an hour one way every day. Before, when I first started living down where I am right now, I did take the bus into work, and that was like a 1 hour bus trip one way every day. And I was reading a lot more physical books then because I wasn't the one driving. But now that I'm the one driving, I cannot be reading a physical book on the way to work. And so audiobooks have become my best friend. Now, I think we need to get over this whole audiobooks don't count sort of situation because there are people like me who commute and love to listen to an audiobook on their commute. There's just also some people that are better auditory learners and don't like to actually read a physical book. So I think if we think about access, if we think about people's learning styles, and if we think about people's lifestyles, I think if BookTube wants to be as inclusive as it says it is, let's stop saying that we hate audiobooks. So again, these are just 5 of my favorites that have really been standouts for me, and let's get started. So one of the best audiobooks that I have ever come across, and I say that if you're going to read this book, I think it has to be done on audio, and that is Born a Crime, Tales from a South African Childhood, written by Trevor Noah. This book made it on my best audiobook, best nonfiction book that I read for the year of 2018, and it all really had to do with Trevor Noah's narration. He does narrate the book. It's the story of his life and growing up as a mixed-race person in a post-apartheid South Africa, which is not something that I can even fathom. And the things that he talks about just in terms of growing up with his mother and her boldness and her independence was super inspiring. Talking about how he would go from place to place with his mother in the city, but then going back into Soweto where his family is, and the kind of code switching that he'd have to do because he was not considered as black as everybody, and what would that mean for him as a young child. That was so interesting. There's all the different languages that Trevor Noah can speak, and for me as a reader, if I had come across a language that I wouldn't be able to pronounce, I would have just skipped over that. But I really feel like in this book, the languages were a super important part of the narrative because it told so much about the South Africa that he was explaining. Just the different dialects between Afrikaans, between English, between the different tribal languages, and I can't even begin to pronounce that one. So it was just something that I think if you're gonna consume this book, it has to be on audio. I will absolutely listen to this book again. So this is like my very first recommendation. You've got to try it out on audiobook if you haven't already. The most recent audiobook that I raved about was Becoming, written by Michelle Obama. I listened to that on audiobook, and Michelle Obama does narrate that as well. And in my January wrap-up, I described it as like going to church. It was so uplifting, so empowering for me as a woman of color, for me as a woman who works in education, or just a person who works in education and works with students who also came from similar backgrounds with her. I work with a lot of first-generation college students, and there were just so many different things that fed me and were inspiring to me from this book. So if you're a fan of Michelle Obama, I think don't skimp out on the audiobook at all. And also, I thought it was super, super fascinating hearing about the presidency from her perspective and just listening to her talk about it as a mom and as a wife and the kinds of things that they thought about with their children being raised in the White House. It was so fascinating. And I'm a person that I'm really like a ceremonial kind of person. I really like the ceremony behind a lot of different things, including the presidency. And so that was just really fascinating for me personally. So I have to recommend Becoming, written by Michelle Obama. And the next book that I want to talk about, this is The Hate U Give, written by Angie Thomas. I listened to this book on audio as well. And this was one of the best books that I have ever encountered. And it could be because last year was a very emotional year for me. I had a family tragedy, and in the beginning of this book, it talks about Star's perspective from her friend being shot and all of the shared family grief that they experienced throughout the whole funeral process and the community coming together. That got me right in the feels so much. And just listening to this was just a really great experience. So if you're not someone who wants to read this book, but you are interested in it, I think try and give it a go on audiobook. The narrator was like super soothing to listen to. She had a really great voice. She had really great voices. Yes, I love this book, so go ahead and give it a try on audiobook, The Hate U Give. All right, now we're finally getting to some fantasy picks. And I bet you're like really surprised that we are now 3 books in out of 5, and I hadn't yet mentioned a fantasy book. So the first one that I want to bring up is Grey Sister, written by Mark Lawrence, as well as Red Sister, the first book in the series. I did both of these on audiobook. Loved them. The female narrator has, again, a really soothing voice. But I think why this one is so successful as a fantasy book on audio is I just like, in some of the fantasy books that I read, there's a lot of instances of poetry and song, and there's a little song that our main character, Nona Grey, tends to sing to herself. And I don't know, it was just really great and really soothing to listen to it from this narrator's perspective. I also just loved all the different nuns, all the different characters and their voices, and the kinds of magic that is used. It's just like such a nebulous kind of magic, and it's this ethereal magic, and I really think her accent just matched it perfectly. So if you're someone who likes to consume your fantasy books and hasn't given this one a try it on audiobook. The narrator was really great. When Holy Sister comes out, that's probably my most anticipated book of 2019. When that one comes out, I will be listening to that one on audio. Super stoked for it. And I don't think anyone should be surprised to see this book here either. This is Traitors Blade, written by Sebastien de Castell. This is the first book of the Greatcoat series. It's a 4-book series, and I listened to the entire series on audiobook, narrated by Joe Jamieson. Go ahead, give this a sample, give this a try. Joe Jamieson was the reason that I did all 4 books on audiobook, because his voices were the best. It's hard for me to get into some fantasy books on audio just because there's so many details, and if I don't jive with the narrator, I'm definitely not going to finish that book on audio. It happened to me with Bloody Rose. I wasn't a fan of that narrator because I just didn't think that narrator understood the humor that the author was trying to convey. I don't have that problem with Joe Jamieson. Each of the characters had their own voice, and we're talking a ton of voices. And I think, and I said this before, probably in my review, or when I first started talking about this book, but this book is so successful, I think, in terms of an audiobook perspective, because it's told in first person. The entire series is told in first person, which you just don't get that often in fantasy books either, but it's told from the perspective of our main character, Falkio. So all of his internal monologue, there's different flashback sequences, and I think Joe Jamieson did a really great job switching back and forth between the flashback sequences, and you're just never going to hear me stop talking about this audiobook series. That includes Traitors Blade, Knight's Shadow, Saint's Blood, and finally Tyrant's Throne. So again, give it a try, love it, Traitors Blade. All right, so I just narrowed this list down to 5. I think there's so many more great fantasy recommendations out there, but I wanted to find my top 5 favorite audiobooks that I've encountered. The most recent one that I did finish was Strange the Dreamer, written by Laini Taylor. That narrator was really great. I've listened to Circe by Madeline Miller. I've listened to Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. He narrates that as well. And so those are some really great recommendations too. But if you are an audiobook person, please go ahead and put some of your favorites, list them down below, and if I have the time, I'll go ahead and check them out. Otherwise, you can find me on my social media. I'm on Twitter and Instagram. It's at whatcassread, same as this channel. Super easy to find. And then my Goodreads link is always listed down below if you prefer that platform. Otherwise, you know how these videos end. I'll talk to you later. Bye.